Okay, so like everyone, I've seen the footage a million times, right? That grainy image of Neil Armstrong taking that first step onto the moon. But doing this deep dive, I don't know, you always kind of take these iconic moments for granted. But when you actually start digging into the Apollo 11 mission, the context, all the things that had to go right,
Yeah.
well, it's mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. It's one thing to see the moon landing as this, like, historical highlight reel, but to really grasp the audacity of it, the sheer scale of the challenge, that's when it hits you. Like, this was 1969. We're talking slide rules and early computers. It's a testament to what human beings can achieve when they really set their minds to something.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners today, what we really want to unpack is not just what happened, but why it matters. Why this one event 50 plus years ago continues to capture our imagination. And to do that, we kind of have to go back to the beginning. Like, what was the driving force behind the space race?
Well, the elephant in the room, of course, is the Cold War. You can't understand Apollo 11 without understanding the rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union. Space became this proxy battleground, right? Each side trying to prove their technological superiority, their system was better.
And it wasn't just about bragging rights, was it? I mean, there was a very real fear, especially in the U.S., after Sputnik launched in '57, that we were falling behind.
Oh, Sputnik was a huge psychological blow. Suddenly, the Soviets had put something in orbit and it was beeping down at us. It triggered this wave of anxiety, like, are we losing the tech race? And then, just a few years later, Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space. Talk about pressure!
Yeah, that must have been a real wake-up call, which I guess is what led to Kennedy's famous speech in '61, where he basically throws down the gauntlet and says, we're going to the moon before the end of the decade.
Bold move, right? To commit to something so ambitious, so seemingly impossible at the time. And that's how the Apollo program is born. I mean, it was this massive undertaking requiring unprecedented levels of funding, scientific collaboration, engineering, everything.
So let's break that down for our listeners. When we talk about the Apollo program, what are the key ingredients? Like, what made it all possible?
Well, first, you need raw power.
Right.
Enter the Saturn V rocket. I mean, this thing was a beast. Taller than the Statue of Liberty, capable of generating 35 million pounds of thrust. You needed that kind of power to escape Earth's gravity and hurl a spacecraft towards the moon.
We often forget there were these crucial stepping stone missions before Apollo 11, right? I mean, you don't just wake up one morning and decide to go to the moon.
Exactly. The Mercury and Gemini programs were essential. They allowed NASA to test the waters, so to speak, figuring out how to launch and return humans safely, doing spacewalks, practicing docking maneuvers. All these things were essential before even thinking about a lunar mission.
And it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? I mean, the Apollo 1 fire in 1967, that must have been devastating for the program.
It was a horrific tragedy. 3 astronauts lost their lives. But in a way, it also highlighted the commitment to the mission. NASA learned from that disaster, implemented rigorous safety changes. It showed that they were willing to face the risks and push forward.
So let's fast forward to Apollo 11 itself. We've got Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins each playing a very specific role.
Right, Armstrong, the commander, he was always going to be the first man on the moon. Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, he'd be right behind him. And then there's Collins, oft and forgotten, but his job was arguably the most nerve-wracking. He stayed in lunar orbit while the others landed. Imagine that alone in a tiny capsule orbiting the moon.
The launch itself must have been a spectacle. I mean, you see the footage, and even today, it's awe-inspiring.
Oh, it was a global event. Millions watching on TV as this massive rocket, the Saturn V, roared off the launch pad. And then 4 days later, after traveling almost 250,000 miles, they reach lunar orbit. But the landing, now that's where things got really tense.
I mean, reading the transcripts from those moments, you can really feel the pressure in mission control.
Oh, yeah. As the lunar module, the Eagle, was descending, they had a computer overload, alarms were going off. This could have easily forced them to abort the landing. Imagine that, coming all that way, only to have to turn back at the last minute.
Plus, they were running low on fuel, weren't they?
Down to the wire. Armstrong had to take manual control, looking for a safe landing spot. They touched down with only seconds of fuel to spare. Talk about a close call.
And then finally, those iconic words, "The Eagle has landed."
It was a moment of collective relief, not just for the crew and mission control, but for the world watching. They'd done it. Humanity had landed on the moon.
So 6 hours later, Armstrong climbs down the ladder and takes that first step. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It's a phrase that's, well, become a cliche almost. But in that moment, it must have felt so profound.
It encapsulated everything: the ambition, the risk, the sheer marvel of human ingenuity. And then Aldrin joins him. For the next 2.5 hours, they explore, plant the flag, collect lunar
Those
samples.
samples, by the way, have been invaluable for scientists. Studying the moon's geology, understanding how it formed, it really opened a new chapter in our understanding of the solar system.
And they also left behind some scientific instruments, like a seismometer to measure moonquakes, and that retroreflector, which is still used today to bounce laser beams off the moon, helping us track its distance and orbit with incredible precision.
And let's not forget the plaque they left on the lunar module. We came in peace for all mankind. It really speaks to the idealistic spirit of the mission, doesn't it?
Definitely. It was meant to be a symbol of international unity, of exploration for the benefit of all humanity. Of course, in the context of the Cold War, it also carried political undertones. The planting of the American flag sparked debates about space ownership, which continue to this day. Who owns the moon? It's a question that still hasn't been definitively answered.
Right, and it raises all sorts of interesting legal and philosophical questions.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to the mission itself, after their moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin have to lift off from the lunar surface and rendezvous with Collins in orbit.
Another tense moment. They're relying on this untested technology, this lunar module, to get them back to the command module. And remember, if something goes wrong, there's no backup. They're millions of miles from home.
Talk about pressure. And then, of course, the return to Earth. That fiery re-entry, the splashdown in the Pacific.
They had to withstand intense heat as they plunged through the atmosphere, but they made it, were picked up by the USS Hornet, and then, something we might find strange today, they were immediately put into quarantine.
Ah, yes, the fear of moon germs. It sounds almost comical now, but I guess it was a legitimate concern at the time.
Absolutely. They didn't know what they might have brought back. But it turned out to be a precaution. No moon bugs. But it shows you how much we were still learning about space. And even today, planetary protection is a big issue when we're talking about missions to Mars and beyond. We don't want to contaminate other worlds, and we also need to be careful about what we might bring back to Earth.
Okay, so before we wrap up, we have to at least acknowledge the, shall we say, alternative theories about the moon landing, the whole "it was faked" idea. I mean, where do you even begin with that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? The persistence of conspiracy theories, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. I think it speaks to our need to question, to find explanations, even if those explanations are, well, a little out there.
Right. So for our listeners who might have encountered these theories, let's just debunk a couple of the big ones, like the waving flag in a vacuum.
Yeah, that one's easy. The flag was mounted on a telescoping pole with a horizontal bar to keep it outstretched. It appears to wave because of wrinkles in the fabric and the way it was handled during setup. No wind required.
And what about the lack of stars in the photos? If it was real, shouldn't there be stars everywhere?
Again, basic photography. The lunar surface was brightly lit by the sun. To properly expose for that, the camera settings wouldn't have picked up the relatively faint light from distant stars. It's the same reason you can't see stars in photos taken during the daytime on Earth.
And then there's the whole thing about the lighting seeming too perfect or shadows being inconsistent.
Well, on the moon, there's no atmosphere to scatter sunlight, so you get very sharp, distinct shadows. The lighting might look artificial to us because we're used to the diffused light on Earth, and any perceived inconsistencies in shadows are simply due to the perspective of the camera and the uneven lunar terrain.
Right, it's all explainable with basic science and a little understanding of how photography works. But the fact that these theories persist shows you how important it is to be critical thinkers.
Exactly. To evaluate evidence, to not just accept things at face value. And this is relevant to so much more than just the moon landing. It applies to all sorts of information we encounter today, especially online.
Okay, so moving on to the legacy of Apollo 11. I think it's fair to say it had a profound impact not just on science, but on society as a whole.
Without a doubt. Technologically, the Apollo program pushed boundaries in computing, materials, science, engineering. A lot of the tech we take for granted today has roots in the space race.
And geopolitically, it was a huge win for the U.S. It really solidified their position as a leader in space exploration.
Definitely. But beyond that, I think it gave humanity this sense of possibility. It showed that we could do incredible things when we work together towards a common goal.
It also inspired generations of scientists, engineers, dreamers. It showed us that the impossible could become possible.
Absolutely. And that spirit of exploration is still alive today. With missions to Mars, the ongoing research on the International Space Station, the development of new space technologies, Apollo 11 lit a fire, and it's still burning.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I guess the question is, what are the giant leaps that we can take today? Not just in space, but in all areas of human endeavor.
That's the challenge for us, right? To find those bold, ambitious goals, those things that seem impossible, and figure out how to achieve them. Apollo 11 shows us it's possible. It requires vision, collaboration, and a willingness to push beyond our perceived limits.
A lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.